All right. Thank you, Nick. We've got Nick Gallo here with us today. Thank you so much for your time and being willing to help students and anybody else listening understand why it's so important that the human resource department of a company helps set the tone for the culture. And we've been talking on this kind of series of interviews that I've been doing about how to find that right culture, and especially with social impact. And Nick Gallo is with ComplianceLine, right? Yeah. And it's really kind of an interesting topic that most people don't think about, especially when they're first starting off getting into the job field and career, aspirations and all that, on the culture that they're actually entering into. So I guess I'd like to start off with, why don't you give a little bit of background on you, Nick, and ComplianceLine, and then we can go into kind of those finer details.
Sure, thanks. So first, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here to talk about my favorite topic, culture. So let me tell you a little bit about ComplianceLine and how we got here. So my brother and I, we run ComplianceLine together. We're the chief servants and chief development officers of the business. And, as a business gets bigger, it gets harder to keep a handle on, whether people are doing what they're supposed to do and if there's undue risks in the company. And it gets harder to kind of have a voice for your workforce. So our team has different tools that help large organizations do exactly that. So we have a hotline that takes intake for like whistleblower calls or Me Too calls or things like that. We have specialized background checks, and we have training. So those things on the surface don't really sound that interesting. It sounds like compliance and a bunch of like rules to follow and so forth. But what we found as we got into this business is that, this function, whether it's compliance, whether it's HR, is the only, some of the only functions that really wrap around an entire business, really touch all aspects of it. Many times as an organization grows, there are these silos that are created. And if you think about like an old school kingdom, there were all these little fiefdoms and everybody kind of fighting with each other. That happens within organizations all the time. So we can have a whole discussion about culture like in and of itself, but just the functions that we're helping with tools are the ones, like I said, that wrap around those silos. And if they can help drive the right things, which I think we'll talk about in a second, they can start to melt some of those walls between those silos. And this business can function like a proper organism.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great analogy, using the silo analogy, and that you guys really are the connector of all those different departments, if you will. When you first enter into a company, especially if they really don't see it that way, how do you first tackle that issue for them?
Well, I think that's an important question. And part of it is, based on what our role is, right? So usually our clients, what they have in common is they kind of get what I'm talking about. And they care a lot. There's some other companies that just get these tools in place just to check the box. And those are the ones that, what we're talking about would sound kind of stupid to them or like alien to them. But a lot of the companies that we work with, we're lucky, they kind of get it. But they can be at different sort of ends of the spectrum. They can be like a large organization that has stuff, already formed. But we're just going to kind of help them execute those things and maybe give some sort of consultative input. Okay. On the other end, we have some clients who are maybe, earlier in their development, they're not like a massive organization yet. Well, if they need the help or they want the help, we can help them to sort of craft the channels that they can utilize to reinforce this culture message. You can't drive culture down to an organization, right? You can't drive purpose down into people. That's stuff that has to spring out organically. So we can't really control what those values within those individual companies are, but we can help them, be a wind in their sails to drive them toward it and help give them, the proper rudders and the proper, whatever other sailing analogy I'm running out of to get them toward that goal.
Nice. Okay. So for the the people that are the younger generations that are trying to figure out that career or just starting into the workforce. Is there anything that you can kind of point to or have them, whether it's questions they should ask or something they see or notice? What are some indications on the type of culture that they're going to be going into? Like you said, there's some organizations that they're doing it to check the box. There are others where it is a part of it. Is there anything that makes it, that they can?
I think when you're looking at I think when they're, when you're kind of getting into the game or you're starting to look at different sort of companies you might go to, I think culture is it's going to be an important element to look at. And what kind of culture do you want? I mean, I don't know. Do you want a cutthroat culture? I mean, that's a culture that some people can thrive in. It's got to be a culture that resonates with you. So I think at a macro level, you can start to kind of get the feeling of an organization. Go on different websites and see what people who work there say. You can ask about what it feels like to work there, because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about the feeling of whatever that team that you're joining is. So there can be something at a high level that you're a feeling of an organization, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to have little culture issues on each team, right? A culture is just a collection of a bunch of people's behaviors, and those groups of behaviors on a 5-person team within a larger organization, it's going to have its own culture and stuff like that. So what I'm getting at is that there's no perfect company and no perfect culture. I think what you have to get, what the advice I would give is to tune into it and try to get a sense of what you're getting into, but also recognize that it's on you, no matter what your position is, to be a leader in your organization. And a leader is just somebody who's willing to step up and be an example to those around them. So if you take that mantle on early, then you can start driving change, which is what you should expect to do your entire career. Be that positive influence on your team. Take that leadership role that's right there and it's implicitly there before you just start living out, so that you can start getting in the habit early of affecting whatever culture you're a part of.
Yeah.
Look, if you get into a massive organization that's like a bank that has 150,000 people, or I don't know, some big investment company or something, you're not going to be able to necessarily change that culture on a macro level in a short amount of time, but you can begin to be a positive force in the little culture that you're a part of. And I'm saying over time that can either affect more people, or it can get you in the mode to do it when you're a leader of a larger group of people and a larger group of people and so forth.
And I like what you said there, that basically leadership is not a title. It's there in front of you. You just have to be willing to step up. And that's really important for all of us, but especially if you're entering in kind of fresh. Just because you don't have the title that implies a leadership role, it still doesn't mean you're not meant to be taking that role. So that's really good.
Well, and it's such an opportunity, because most people don't even think that way.
Right.
So then everybody else is just they're not swimming, they're just floating. And you can get in, you can really start swimming and start making some waves in the pool that you're in, and really start making a difference and advance your own career, and all that goodness that we're going after are really byproducts of these micro behaviors and micro habits and how we sort of live every day.
So if would one good strategy be to kind of look, especially if it's a larger organization, look specifically at their HR, kind of how that functions, or ask questions about the HR to get an idea of what type of culture at least they're trying to do on the macro level? Would that be some insight that they could?
I think that's a really smart place to look, because you'll probably be talking to a lot of HR people. But then you can also, again, look online for reviews of what it feels like, and ask the other people that you're interviewing with, or ask to talk to other people in your role or a year or so past you, so you can really see what you can start to get a sense for the gap between the the sort of the culture on the wall, whatever HR is trying to push, and what's actually happening. Because those are never obviously the same things. Sometimes these are very these values are aspirational, and the culture that they're trying to push is what they're trying to push toward. What is it really like?
Right.
And how big of a gap is there? And if you can get some candid responses, you're going to just be your eyes are going to be open to things that you maybe wouldn't have been open to if you were just looking at the number on on the offer letter.
Right, right. Anything else for our, again, specifically kind of our younger audience? I know anybody might be listening to this once we get this out there, but just really trying to target the kind of those 14 to 22-year-olds that are still in that range. Anything that for you looking back, or other people that you've talked to, any big thing that comes out as kind of the one thing they wish they would have thought of before they, or while they were interviewing, like any hacks on that?
Yeah, I love that question. So the thing that I would say is you always got to think about what your next move is. So think about your, your career as like a rifle that you're aiming, right? You're aiming it at some target. Well, for that to be lined up, you have to look at sort of the sight that's nearest you. That's the job you're going to get now. And then you also have to line up the sight at the end of the barrel toward this target. And so if you're only looking at that front sight, you're never going to be accurate toward driving toward a goal. But if you can be at least thinking about that next thing, then it's going to, again, give you some more directions for where you think you want to go. And that can move, that can aim at different things, and that sort of thing can change. But it's also going to give you some context for like whatever pain you're going through on the front end, right? Because any job you get into initially, you're going to be, the bottom rung, and you work real hard and you move up to next to the bottom rung. Well, those moves between those rungs are built on like a lot of grunt work, right? So if you have that next thing in mind, then that grunt work you're going through is easier to kind of palate, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about a doctor going through med school. Like med school is kind of a pain, but they want to be a doctor, right? So they have that next thing in mind. But bring that to your career, and I think it'll give you a lot more direction. And I think the last piece would be to like recognize that it's really all about your network and who you know, whether that's inside an organization or trying to move to somewhere, to a different job, down the road. So start building relationships up and down the organization, and like across the organization as well, because you never know what doors that's going to open. It's just a really critical thing to help accelerate,
And yeah, that's great advice. And I love the analogy of kind of that rifle with the aim. That's perfect. So on a side note, I've been following your crazy goal of the 100 books. It's not crazy. It's awesome. I had 2 questions about that though. Are you taking notes on the books as you go, since you are trying to get through so many? Are you kind of, after each book, taking a moment to write out like, okay, this is what I took away from this book. This is what I took away from this book?
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. So I just have like little notes for each book that I'm reading, and like as I get to a good part, I'll like add the notes to it.
Okay.
And then I try to do like a little review that has some takeaways from each book, and post it so that I'm at least capturing some of the thoughts.
So it's one of the ways to do that. Good.
But for me, because I'm doing this thing, I'm like talking about the books that I'm reading all the time. So I'm getting to like put them into practice like immediately.
Nice.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know. So that helps to kind of like solidify it in my mind. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So there are, I don't know where you're getting your list from, if it's general recommendations, but I'm assuming, I guess, that you've probably already read the book Grit.
I have not. You know what? I'm gonna do that one.
So
I've heard it a couple times. I heard it's a really good book.
So and the way I did this was Grit and then Range, and you do them in that order, and it's really collectively really impactful. And I don't want to ruin it. You'll just read them both, and then you'll understand why.
What was the second one called?
Range.
Okay.
Yep. That's by David Epstein.
Cool.
And then Grit was Angela Duxbury.
You're like the second or third person who said this book in the last probably 2 weeks. So
okay.
That means it needs to jump to the front of the list.
Yep, it's meant to be. Well, just make sure you follow it up with Range, because he actually refers to Grit in his book. So it'll be fresh in your mind, and you'll be able to compare and contrast the 2 books. It's really, really cool. So thank you again. I really appreciate it, Nick, for your time. And again, this is Nick with ComplianceLine. And best thing is to reach out to you through LinkedIn, yes? If they've got questions?
Yeah, LinkedIn probably.
Okay. All right.
Glad to help anyone who needs some help, and best of luck to everybody. If these people are how you described them, they're well on their way to a life of continued success.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
Appreciate it. Thank you.